Hello, so today we are going to look at the pre-release for AS Computer Science, which is a queue stimulator. Just a quick overview of the stimulation. The program stimulates a queue system in a shop where buyers arrive at the till at irregular time intervals with varying number of items in their basket. There is a single queue which is shared by all the tills. When a buyer arrives, they join that one queue, and when a till becomes free, the buyer at the front of that queue is served at that till. Users can choose to either change the setting or continue with the default setting. If they decide to continue with the default setting, then of course the stimulation is loaded, but if they decide to change the setting, then they can choose how long the stimulation should run for and how many tills to operate. At the end of each time unit, the program outputs the state of the till and the queue. In the stimulation program, a time unit is essentially the tick of a clock, so it's the small slice of time where things happen in the shop. So imagine it like a single moment where action occurs, such as buyers arriving, being served at the till, or waiting in the queue. At the end of each time unit, the program checks what's happening in the shop and then updates the stimulation accordingly. So for example, if a buyer arrives during a time unit, they join the queue. If the till becomes available, the next buyer in the queue starts getting served. So the time unit is just a way to break down the time into manageable chunks for the stimulation to keep a track of what's happening in the shop. In the default setting of the stimulation, the program runs for 10 time units with 2 tills operating. So if the user decides to change the setting, they're prompted to enter new values for the stimulation time and the number of till. So on the screen, you can see a screenshot of figure 1 taken out from the preliminary material. We can see the output at the end of time unit 0, where the buyer arrives with 8 items and is being served immediately at till 1 without needing to queue. Till 1's time busy is increased by 1 and till 2 remain idle. The time it takes to serve a buyer's basket is calculated based on the number of items in their basket. The stimulation program utilizes the data file stimulation-data.txt. So on the text file, you can see the data is stored as d/n. So d is essentially the number of time units before the next buyer arrives, and n is the number of items in the basket. It's essentially used to provide the arrival times and the number of items in the basket for each buyer during the stimulation. Okay, so here are some constants and global variables which are declared at the top of our code. So we've got blank, which represents an empty space. Max queue size is the maximum size of the queue. Max tills is the maximum number of tills. Max times is the maximum stimulation time. Till speed is the speed at which the items at the tills are served. Time idle, time busy, and time serving are constant, representing the indices of time related to the data in the till. Arrival time and items are constant, representing the indices of arrival time and the number of items in the data stimulation. We've got a class queue node, which represents a node in the queue containing information about the buyer. So essentially the different data items in our queue. So we've got different functions in this program. Reset data structures initialize the data structures for different calculations. Change setting allow the user to change stimulation settings. So for example, when they are prompted to enter the stimulation time and the number of tills. Read in stimulation data reads stimulation data from the text file provided. Output heading outputs the header for displaying till and queue states. Buyer joins queue handles when a buyer joins the queue. Buyer arrives handles when a buyer arrives at the shop. Find free till finds a free till for serving a buyer. Served buyer serves the buyer at the till. Update stats updates statistics based on buyer's waiting time. Calculate serving time calculates the serving time for buyer's items, so based on how many items they've got. Increment time waiting increments waiting time for buyers in the queue. Update till updates the status of the till based on the serving time and the idle time. Output till and queue states outputs the current state of the till as well as the queue. Serving handles the serving process, including the serving buyer and updating states. Tills busy checks if the tills are still busy. Output stats output stimulation statistics, so whatever you can see at the end of the code is represented by that. Queue stimulator is the main function which actually stimulates our queue. So the main function checks if the code is being run directly, and then it calls the queue stimulator function, which pauses the execution at the end to keep the output visible. So here are some key features of the program. The first thing is how the code allows the user to change the stimulation settings, such as the stimulation time and the number of tills. This functionality is implemented by our change setting function, which prompts the user to input new values for the setting if desired. So if the user selects Y, as in yes, at the beginning of the program, they are prompted to enter the number of tills and the stimulation time. Now the data is being read from stimulation data text file, so each line of this file represents an arrival time and the number of items in the basket for the buyer. This data is read and stored in the data list using the read in stimulation data function. The code maintains a queue of buyers using buyer queue list. When a buyer arrives, they are added to the queue, and when a till becomes available, the next buyer in the queue is served. The queue is managed using the functions buyer joins queue and serve buyer. Tills are represented using the tills list. So each list has the attributes including idle time, busy time, and the time remaining to serve the current buyer. The find free till function is used to find an available till for the next buyer. The main stimulation loop runs for the specified stimulation time. During each time unit, it checks for buyer's arrival, serves buyers if the till are available, and updates the queue and till states accordingly. The code formats and outputs the state of the tills and the queue at the end of each time unit. This includes till idle time, till busy time, buyer's waiting time, and the number of items in their basket. So that's what you can see at the end. Throughout the stimulation, the maximum queue length, maximum waiting time, and the average waiting time are calculated and updated constantly. So these statistics are then output at the end of the simulation. Once the simulation time is reached and all buyers have been served, the code outputs the final data and waits for the user input before finishing. That's the brief overview of the overall code. Please feel free to ask any questions you may have, drop them in the comment section below, and I'll be very happy to help you out.